They wished me luck getting back home. My child and her spouse chuckled as they left me behind on a barren path in Egypt. I stood there as their vehicle sped off. They were unaware that I alone inherited a $330 million estate. And they'd just flunked the ultimate evaluation. If you're viewing this, hit subscribe and share your location in the comments. Allow me to explain how a 67-year-old widow from Minnesota found herself isolated in a remote area and how the avarice of my relatives led to their complete ruin. Believe me, this tale includes surprises you won't anticipate. It began 3 months prior when my spouse Robert died abruptly from cardiac arrest. We'd shared 42 years of marriage, and his loss seemed like half my essence had vanished. Yet Robert was an exceptional money manager, and he'd ensured I was extremely secure financially. The attorneys described it as wealth spanning generations, sufficient to sustain multiple households for many years. Madison had consistently kept her distance, right from childhood. She'd relocated to California following university and only reached out during celebrations, typically seeking funds. The appeals began modestly after Robert's passing. Assistance with housing costs, vehicle installments, credit obligations, but they escalated in size and regularity when she abruptly appeared at Robert's memorial service alongside her recent spouse, Tyler. Asserting she desired to rebuild our connection and support her mother in this challenging period, I ought to have been wary. However, sorrow renders you open to optimism. Tyler embodied all that Madison lacked. Charismatic, considerate, brimming with suggestions for strengthening family ties. He was also 6 years her senior compared to my 22-year-old daughter, which ought to have raised the initial alarm. But he possessed a knack for making you feel valued, as if you held the utmost importance in any setting. Typical tactics of a deceiver, although I failed to recognize it at the time, the indicators of trouble had appeared over several weeks. Madison had posed progressively detailed inquiries regarding Robert's testament, the extent of our finances, and if I'd arranged anything for her prospects. She'd also urged me to revise my inheritance arrangements, proposing that fresher viewpoints on money handling were necessary. "Sarah, you've always mentioned wanting to see Egypt," Tyler remarked during one of their regular stops at my residence in Minneapolis. "The ancient pyramids, the River Nile, all that rich history you adore." Madison and I considered, what if we turned that aspiration into reality? A group excursion to mend and unite. I felt moved. For 4 decades, Robert had vowed we'd view the pyramids as a couple one day. Now, Tyler proposed realizing that when my daughter herself never had. What I remained ignorant of was that they devoted weeks to examining Egyptian regulations, financial networks, and the duration required to declare someone deceased after vanishing. Tyler had persuaded Madison that I'd squander their legacy on donations and health costs. He depicted me as an egotistical elderly lady who failed to grasp money's worth. The reality was far less complex. Tyler was overwhelmed by betting obligations, and Madison was so eager to retain her mature spouse that she'd comply with any demand, even stranding her mother to perish in the wilderness. We arrived in Cairo by air on October 15th. The initial days felt enchanting. Observing the Sphinx, exploring the pyramids, cruising along the Nile. Tyler acted as the ideal in-law, capturing images of Madison and me side by side, demanding we create lasting recollections. Now I comprehend why he pushed so hard to record it all. He required evidence that I'd been vibrant and content at the journey's start. On our 4th day, Tyler proposed leasing a vehicle to discover genuine Egypt beyond the visitor masses. He'd located this remarkable Bedouin community, he claimed, where we could immerse in authentic Arab traditions. Madison appeared anxious, but Tyler's zeal was so compelling that I consented. We traveled for hours into the wasteland, the surroundings growing more isolated with every kilometer. Tyler conversed nonstop, highlighting fictional points of interest, maintaining a cheerful atmosphere. I sat in the rear with a compact knapsack I'd packed for short outings, my shades and cap shielding me from the brightness. Genuinely relishing the escapade, then the vehicle halted. "Mechanical issue," Tyler declared, lifting the bonnet. "Sarah, can you fetch that toolkit from the trunk?" I stepped out to assist, and that's when I heard the vehicle doors close sharply. By the moment I pivoted, Tyler was already retreating from me. Madison in the front seat, gazing anywhere except my direction. "Tyler, Madison, what's happening?" "Sorry, Sarah," Tyler shouted, his allure entirely vanished. "Nothing personal. But we require that legacy immediately." Not in 2 decades, Madison eventually met my gaze, and I read the truth in her expression. This wasn't an impulsive choice. This was premeditated. "Madison," I stated, my tone firm despite the astonishment. "Whatever he's offered you, it's not worth this. Good luck finding your way back." She chuckled, but it rang strained, frantic. Tyler was already maneuvering the car around, and then they vanished, stranding me with only my small knapsack holding a water container, a few treats, sunblock, and my current attire. The quiet of the wilderness was overwhelming. As I observed their dust trail fade, an odd sensation arose. Rather than fear, I experienced a sense of irony. If Madison and Tyler believed they faced a defenseless elderly widow, they were on the verge of discovering precisely how mistaken they were. After all, you don't endure 40 years wed to someone like Robert without picking up strategies, and they'd just committed the gravest strategic blunder of their existence. But initially, I needed to endure the wilderness. Standing solitary in the Sahara with the sun pounding relentlessly, most individuals would have succumbed to terror. I won't deny it. For the initial moments, the magnitude of Madison and Tyler's act struck me like a tangible strike. My own child had essentially condemned me to demise, but then my pragmatic Midwestern mindset engaged. Terror was an indulgence I couldn't permit. I possessed hydration for perhaps 12 hours, some biscuits, and sun protection in my bag. The closest settlement might range from 10 to 100 miles distant. Time to set priorities. I surveyed the area, assessing my circumstances. The path we'd followed was scarcely a path, more like will imprints in the grains that might vanish with the next gust. The terrain was severe and unrelenting, but not utterly lifeless. I spotted sparse foliage afar, suggesting possible hydration spots. My deceased husband, Robert, often remarked that wisdom involves recognizing your limitations. Well, I lacked extensive knowledge of arid endurance, but I understood fundamentals of science and physiology enough to grant myself an opportunity. Top priority: protection from the sunlight. I located a group of stones providing shade and settled to contemplate. Madison and Tyler anticipated my demise here, implying they possessed a scheme for the aftermath. They'd require time to return to populated areas, declare me lost, and somehow obtain Robert's funds. That's where their scheme contained a critical defect. They knew of my affluence, but they were clueless about Robert's financial setup. My spouse had been wary of relatives turning covetous post-mortem, likely from witnessing it with his father. All significant holdings were secured in trusts with particular stipulations that even I didn't entirely grasp. Tyler and Madison were poised to learn that pilfering from the departed isn't as straightforward as they imagined. But I'm advancing too quickly. At that instant, my primary focus was remaining vital long enough to witness their reactions upon grasping their deeds. As the day progressed, I allocated my liquids sparingly and attempted to recall all I'd encountered on wilderness persistence. The chill would plummet sharply after dark. That might benefit me. I had to preserve stamina in daylight and move under cover of night when temperatures dropped. When the sun commenced descending, coloring the sands in vivid hues of amber and crimson, I began trekking. I traced the dim wheel marks, wishing they'd guide me someplace, any place inhabited. The nighttime wilderness transforms entirely. The hush is total, save for sporadic breezes over dunes. The constellations shine so intensely they strain the vision, and the frost pierces like a blade following the day's scorching blaze. I marched for hours, pausing often to recuperate and verify my path using the North Star. Grateful that my dad had instructed me in elementary orientation during youth. My feet developed sores in my casual footwear, and my hydration dwindled, but I persisted. Just as daybreak emerged, when I began doubting if departing my minor refuge was erroneous, I noticed structures ahead. Aged, deteriorating, likely forsaken, but certainly constructed by humans. It proved to be a tiny Bedouin hamlet abandoned for ages. Most edifices were crumbling, but some walls remained solid and, astonishingly, an ancient water source at the center. I'd never felt such joy at sighting murky liquid. The source retained fluid, though salty and mineral-flavored. I consumed cautiously, aware that excess haste might induce illness. Then I located the most protected structure and succumbed to weary slumber. When I awoke, it was late day and an observer was present. An aged Bedouin gentleman sat legs crossed by the entrance, his lined visage benevolent yet inquisitive. He uttered Arabic, motioning toward me with worry. I didn't comprehend the language, but his inflection was evident. He inquired about my well-being. American, I indicated, gesturing to myself. Lost family. I mimed that they'd deserted me. His demeanor grew somber. He knew sufficient English to grasp the essence, and, evidently, forsaking kin in the sands was as reprehensible to him as to any decent person. Over the following day, this generous unknown, whose name resembled Hakim, instructed me in essential arid endurance. Methods to gather moisture via fabric for consumption, which flora were safe to eat and which lethal. Ways to orient by celestial bodies and interpret faint indicators of direction. He also provided something unanticipated, affirmation that I possessed greater resilience than I'd conceived. At 67, I acquired abilities many would deem unattainable at my stage. On the subsequent dawn, Hakim pointed to the skyline and spoke Arabic, then indicated himself followed by me. He offered to escort me to populated regions, but as we readied to depart the forsaken hamlet, I reached a choice that astonished even myself. I requested he pause while I performed a crucial task. With charcoal from a former hearth, I inscribed a note on the wall of the most visible edifice. Madison and Tyler left me here to die on October 18, 2024. If you find this and I don't survive, they murdered me for my inheritance. Sarah Catherine Walsh. Then I replicated it in bigger script on a smooth stone by the water source. Label it safeguard, label it proof, but primarily label it the initial phase in what would become the most gratifying retribution of my existence. As Hakim, and I ventured across the sands toward the primary route. I discovered myself nearly anticipating the forthcoming events. Madison and Tyler assumed they'd removed the sole barrier to their riches. They were oblivious that they'd roused something much more perilous than a vulnerable elderly widow. They'd roused a female with no remaining attachments and all to demonstrate. The vehicle that eventually halted for Hakim and me was operated by a European scholar of antiquities named Dr. Andreas Meyer, who assessed my state and promptly signaled for health aid. 2 days amid the sands had rendered me parched, scorched by sun, and appearing as if I'd endured torment, which I truly had. My God, what happened to you? Dr. Meyer inquired as he aided my entry into his cooled transport. The comfort of chill air was so profound, I almost wept. My relatives stranded me in the wilderness, I replied plainly. No need to soften it. His expression shifted through various stages: incredulity, revulsion, and ultimately fury. That's attempted homicide, he stated directly. We must transport you to medical care and alert officials right away. As we journeyed to Cairo, I was in the peculiar situation of persuading others not to assist excessively. Dr. Meyer desired to summon law enforcement instantly. The medical personnel sought to hospitalize me for monitoring. The U.S. diplomatic office aimed to initiate a global crisis, but I possessed an alternative strategy. I value everyone's worry, I informed the diplomatic representative. A sincere youth named David Patterson, who seemed inexperienced beyond misplaced travel documents. But I must manage this personally. Mrs. Walsh, your daughter and in-law deserted you in the sands. This constitutes a grave offense. Oh, I'm fully conscious of their actions, I responded. And they'll atone for it, but not as you envision. What I withheld from David was that I'd already placed multiple calls from the medical facility. The initial went to my legal counsel in Minneapolis, James Morrison, who nearly suffered cardiac distress upon recognizing my voice. Sarah, thank heavens. Madison and Tyler claimed you missing 2 days past. They stated you strayed from the lodging and failed to return. Egyptian authorities have been hunting. James, I cut in. I require your full attention. Madison and Tyler attempted to end my life. They abandoned me in the sands to perish. Do not, in any scenario, grant them entry to Robert's holdings or funds. A prolonged quiet ensued. My God, Sarah, are you sure? I endured 2 days in the Sahara with merely a water vessel and biscuits. I'm absolutely sure. What should I do presently? Nothing. Allow them to believe their scheme succeeds, but prepare for judicial proceedings and activate a measure Robert established that I never anticipated needing. The measure Robert established was ingenious and characteristic of my prudent spouse's foresight. Embedded within our inheritance papers was a clause that, should I perish suspiciously, an automated inquiry would commence and all holdings frozen pending full clarification. Madison and Tyler were unaware this clause existed. My second contact was to my financial institution in Minneapolis. This is Sarah Walsh. I must initiate a fraud warning on all accounts without delay. Of course, Mrs. Walsh. What fraudulent actions concern you? The sort where my kin attempts to seize my legacy after deserting me to die. The institution's agent, commend her composure, didn't hesitate. I'll mark everything at once. Should we anticipate access attempts shortly? Oh yes, likely in the coming days. My third contact was the most fulfilling. I phoned Madison's line, and she responded immediately. Hello. Her tone was strained, anxious. Hello, sweetheart. The ensuing quiet was so extended I assumed the connection failed. Mom, she murmured at last. But how? Where are you? I'm in Cairo, Madison. Alive, if you cared to know. Though I guess that's not what you hoped. Mom, I don't understand. We've been searching everywhere for you. You vanished from the hotel and cut the act, I said, my tone firmer than ever before. I know precisely what you and Tyler did. The question is, what happens next? Another extended quiet. Then where? Where have you been? Where you left me? In the desert. The difference is I survived. I could hear Tyler in the background, posing urgent queries. Madison's tone trembled when she replied. Mom, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding was mine, thinking you had any love or loyalty left for your family. But that's about to be corrected. What do you mean? I mean, you and Tyler just made the biggest mistake of your lives. You thought you were killing a helpless old woman. Instead, you've awakened someone who has nothing left to lose and unlimited resources for revenge. The line went quiet except for the sound of Madison's panicked breathing. Enjoy Cairo, sweetheart, I continued. But don't get too comfortable. You're about to learn that stealing from your family is much harder than you thought, especially when that family member is still alive to stop you. I ended the call before she could reply. Dr. Meyer had been correct about one aspect. What Madison and Tyler had done was attempted murder, but legal prosecution would be swift and straightforward. Over in a matter of months, what I had in mind was going to last much, much longer. Over the next 2 days, while I recuperated in a deluxe lodging in Cairo, funded by a payment card that Madison and Tyler certainly couldn't touch, I set the remainder of my strategy in action. First, I engaged a confidential detective in Minneapolis to probe Tyler's history. What I uncovered was intriguing. Tyler Morrison wasn't merely an opportunist. He was a seasoned fraudster with a record of preying on affluent, mature females. My 22-year-old daughter wasn't his initial target, just his latest. Second, I found that Tyler owed substantial sums to some quite disagreeable individuals in Las Vegas, amounting to $1.2 million. His scheme to pilfer my legacy wasn't solely driven by covetousness. It was for his own preservation. Third, and most crucially, I uncovered something about myself I'd never realized. After 67 years as the devoted spouse, the yielding parent, the individual who prioritized others, I realized I possessed a genuine aptitude for tactical planning. Robert used to say that the finest retribution is living well. But occasionally the finest retribution is observing your adversaries self-destruct while you manipulate the outcomes. From my lodging chamber viewing the Nile, I began placing contacts. By the time Madison and Tyler grasped the situation, it would be irreversible. The contest had just commenced, and for the first time in months, I was truly relishing it. Madison and Tyler were unaware I observed from the opposite side when they emerged unsteadily from the Egyptian law enforcement building at 2 a.m., appearing exhausted and hopeless. They'd been held for 6 hours, responding to inquiries about my vanishing that had abruptly grown far more intricate now that I'd resurfaced, quite vital that I devoted the day collaborating with officials, but not as Dr. Meyer and the diplomatic agent anticipated. Rather than filing accusations right away, I presented a meticulously altered account that portrayed Madison and Tyler as bewildered and alarmed. Not deliberate. I believe a miscommunication occurred, I'd clarified to the investigator. They assumed I was at the lodging when they departed. When they couldn't locate me, they logically feared the worst. The investigator appeared doubtful. Mrs. Walsh. Abandoning someone in the sands without conveyance or provisions is a dreadful error, I concurred. But I'm uncertain it was deliberate. My daughter isn't a slayer, officer. She's merely youthful and readily swayed. What I withheld from the investigator was that I'd already amassed sufficient proof to ruin them both via judicial means. But judicial means would be rapid and detached. What I desired was to observe them disintegrate gradually, thoroughly, and openly. After they exited the law enforcement building, I tailed them to their lodging. The expression on Tyler's face as they crossed the foyer was sheer dread. Whatever scheme he devised was collapsing, and he was beginning to comprehend that deserting me might have been his life's worst choice. I allowed them an hour to compose themselves, then rapped on their entrance. Tyler opened it, and his complexion paled upon seeing me. Sarah, hello, Tyler. May I come in? We need to talk. Madison emerged behind him, her eyes swollen from tears. She appeared to have matured 5 years in the prior week. Mom, she said, her voice barely audible. I'm so sorry. I don't know what came over us. Tyler said you'd be fine, that someone would find you quickly, and you just decided to trust your husband over your mother, I said, settling into the room's sole seat. How did that work out for you? Tyler was striding back and forth like a trapped beast. Look, Sarah, I know how this looks, but sit down, Tyler. Something in my tone compelled him to comply instantly. I've had several interesting conversations over the past few days, I continued. With my lawyer, my bank, some private investigators, and even some people in Las Vegas who've been looking for you. Tyler became utterly motionless. Did you really think I wouldn't find out about the gambling debts? About the other women you've scammed? About the fact that you're facing serious criminal charges in Nevada that you've been avoiding for the past year? Madison stared at her husband. What gambling debts? What other women? Oh, he didn't tell you, I asked with mock surprise. Tyler owes $1.2 million to some very unpleasant people who don't accept payment plans. He needed my inheritance, not just for greed, but because his kneecaps depend on it. The look of betrayal on Madison's face was almost worth the 2 days in the desert. Almost. That's not Tyler. Tell her that's not true. Tyler couldn't meet her eyes, and the other women, I continued, enjoying myself now. Let's see. There was Mrs. Henderson in Phoenix, $400,000. Mrs. Chin in San Diego, $200,000. And my personal favorite, Mrs. Blackwood in Seattle, who Tyler married and divorced in the same year, walking away with half her assets. Madison sank onto the bed, staring at Tyler like she'd never seen him before. You've been married before. Technically, he's still married to Mrs. Blackwood, I said. Which means his marriage to you isn't legal. But don't worry, sweetheart, because that's the least of your problems. Tyler finally found his voice. What do you want, Sarah? What do I want? I laughed, and it wasn't a pleasant sound. I want to watch you both face the consequences of your actions. I want Madison to understand what happens when you try to murder your own mother for money. And I want you, Tyler, to experience what it feels like when someone more powerful than you decides to destroy your life. We didn't try to murder you, Madison protested weakly. You left me in the desert with minimal water, no transportation, and no way to call for help. What exactly did you think would happen? The silence stretched between us. Here's what's going to happen, I said, standing up. Tomorrow morning, you're both going to the American Embassy where you're going to confess exactly what you did. Madison, you're going to call every single person you've told lies to about my disappearance, and you're going to correct the record. And if we don't, Tyler asked. I smiled at him, and I could see him flinch at whatever he saw in my expression. If you don't, those men from Las Vegas are going to get a very interesting phone call about where you've been hiding. My bank is going to press charges for attempted fraud. The Egyptian authorities are going to learn that you're a fugitive from American justice, and the private investigator I hired is going to release a very detailed report about your criminal history to every major newspaper in Minneapolis. Tyler was sweating now. You can't do that. Watch me. I pulled out my phone and showed them a photo I'd taken that morning. It was the message I'd written on the wall of the abandoned Bedouin village. Clear evidence of what they'd done. This little note is now in the hands of the Egyptian police, the American consulate, and my attorney. It's what's called evidence of premeditated murder. I also left GPS coordinates so the authorities can verify exactly where you abandoned me. Madison was crying again. Mom, please. I know we made a terrible mistake, but this wasn't a mistake, Madison. This was attempted murder motivated by greed. And the only reason you're sorry is because you got caught. I walked to the door, then turned back. You have until tomorrow morning to decide what kind of consequences you want to face. The easy ones or the hard ones. But either way, you're going to face them. As I left their hotel room, I could hear Madison screaming at Tyler, demanding to know what else he'd lied about. The sound was music to my ears. The next morning, I treated myself to breakfast on the hotel terrace overlooking the Nile. The sun was shining. The coffee was excellent. And somewhere across the city, two people who'd tried to kill me were discovering exactly how much power a determined woman with unlimited resources could wield. Madison had called me 3 times already. I wasn't answering. Tyler had called once. I'd answered that one just to hang up on him. By noon, they'd be at the embassy confessing everything. By evening, they'd be on a plane back to Minneapolis, where a very different kind of justice would be waiting. But the best part, they still had no idea what I had planned for them when we got home. The beautiful thing about having real money, the kind of generational wealth that Tyler and Madison had tried to steal, is that you can afford to be patient. You can hire the best people, wait for the perfect moment, and strike with precision that leaves your enemies completely destroyed. 3 weeks after returning from Egypt, I was sitting in the office of Harrison and Associates, Minneapolis's most prestigious private investigation firm. The manila folder in front of me contained enough information to end Tyler's life as he knew it and seriously damage Madison's as well. Mrs. Walsh, Harrison said, leaning back in his leather chair. I have to admit, this is the most comprehensive revenge operation I've ever been hired to execute. I prefer to think of it as justice, I replied, sipping my coffee. What's our timeline? Harrison opened his laptop. Tyler's creditors in Las Vegas received an anonymous tip about his location yesterday. They'll be in Minneapolis by Friday. His illegal marriage status has been reported to the appropriate authorities. Bigamy charges will be filed Monday morning. And his probation officer in Nevada, who apparently had no idea where he'd been for the past year, is very interested in having a conversation with him and Madison. The IRS received some very interesting information about unreported income and tax evasion. Apparently, Tyler's been using her social security number for some creative financial arrangements. She's looking at serious federal charges. I nodded, feeling a satisfaction I hadn't expected. 3 weeks ago, I would have felt guilty about destroying my own daughter's life. Now, after surviving in the desert and discovering exactly what my 22-year-old daughter was capable of, I felt nothing but cold determination. There's more, Harrison continued. We traced Tyler's pattern back 7 years, 12 different women, combined losses of over $3.8 million. The FBI is very interested in what we've uncovered. When will they arrest him? Soon. But here's where it gets interesting. Tyler doesn't know about any of this yet. According to our surveillance, he and Madison are still trying to figure out how to access your accounts legally. That made me laugh. They're still trying to steal from me. Apparently, your son-in-law isn't very good at learning from his mistakes. What Tyler and Madison didn't know was that I'd been 3 steps ahead of them since the moment I walked out of that desert. While they'd been panicking and making desperate phone calls, I'd been systematically dismantling their lives with the precision of a master chess player. The first move had been financial. Within hours of my return to Minneapolis, every account Robert had set up was locked down tighter than Fort Knox. Tyler's attempts to access anything had been monitored and recorded, providing perfect evidence of his criminal intent. The second move had been legal. My attorney, James Morrison, had filed papers that not only protected my assets, but also initiated civil suits against both Tyler and Madison for attempted murder, fraud, and elder abuse. The criminal charges would come later after we'd gathered enough evidence to ensure convictions. The third move had been personal. I'd hired a public relations firm to prepare a very carefully crafted media campaign. In 1 week, Tyler Morrison's face would be on every local news channel and in every major newspaper, identified as a serial con artist who specialized in targeting elderly women. "Mrs. Walsh," Harrison said, pulling me back to the present. "There's something else you should know. We've been monitoring their communications and Tyler is planning to leave the country. When? Tonight. He's booked a flight to Brazil under a fake identity." I stood up, suddenly energized. "Can we stop him? We can do better than that. We can let him get all the way to the airport, then have him arrested for probation violation, fraud, and fleeing to avoid prosecution. Maximum humiliation, maximum media coverage. Perfect." That evening, I drove to Madison's apartment, the apartment I'd helped her pay for, I might add, and knocked on the door. She answered, looking haggard and desperate. "Mom, thank God. Tyler's gone crazy. He's talking about leaving the country, and I don't understand what's happening. He says people are after him, and where is he, Madison? He's at the airport. Mom, I'm scared. I think Tyler might have done things I didn't know about. Bad things." I looked at my daughter, this young woman who'd stood by while her husband tried to murder me, and felt a strange mix of pity and disgust. "Tyler's a criminal, Madison. He's been scamming elderly women for years, and you helped him try to kill me for my inheritance. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences?" Her face crumpled. "I didn't know about the other women. I swear I didn't know. Tyler said you were going to waste our inheritance. That we had to act before you spent it all. Our inheritance?" I stepped into her apartment without being invited. "Madison, let me explain something to you. You don't have an inheritance anymore. After what you did in Egypt, you don't have a mother anymore either." "What do you mean?" I handed her a legal document I'd been carrying. "This is a formal disinheritance notice. You'll get nothing when I die. Not a penny." Madison read the document, her hands shaking. "You can't do this. I'm your only child. You stopped being my child when you left me to die in the desert." My phone buzzed. A text from Harrison. "Package delivered at gate 42. Customer very unhappy with service." I smiled. Tyler had just been arrested. "That was notification that your husband has been taken into custody," I told Madison. "He's facing charges in 3 states now, including attempted murder in Egypt. The FBI is also very interested in talking to him about his pattern of targeting elderly women." Madison sank onto her couch, the legal document falling from her hands. "I don't understand. How did you do all this, sweetheart?" "I survived for 40 years married to one of the shrewdest financial minds in Minneapolis. Did you really think I was some helpless old woman you could outsmart? But the desert, you could have died. I could have. I almost did. And if I had, you and Tyler would have been millionaires. That was your plan, wasn't it?" Madison was crying now. Great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," Tyler said. He made it sound like what? Like I deserve to die for my money. She couldn't answer. I walked to her window and looked out at the Minneapolis skyline, the city where I'd built a life with Robert, where I'd raised this ungrateful daughter, where I'd thought I'd live out my remaining years in peace. "You know what the irony is, Madison? If you'd just been patient, if you'd just been a loving daughter, you would have inherited everything eventually. Robert's estate planning was designed to take care of you for the rest of your life." "It's not too late," Madison said desperately. "I can make this right. I can testify against Tyler." "I can. It's much too late for that." I turned back to face her, and she flinched at whatever she saw in my expression. "Tyler's arrest is just the beginning. Over the next 6 months, you're both going to face criminal charges, civil lawsuits, federal investigations, and public humiliation that will follow you for the rest of your lives. Mom, please don't. I'm not your mother anymore. I'm the woman whose murder you planned and whose money you tried to steal. And I'm the woman who's going to make sure you both pay for what you did." I left Madison sobbing in her apartment and drove home to the house I'd shared with Robert for so many years. For the first time since his death, I felt truly at peace. Tyler was in jail. Madison would join him soon. Justice wasn't just coming. It was here. But the best part was still to come. 6 months later, I was sitting in a courtroom watching Tyler Morrison accept a plea deal for 8 years in federal prison for elder fraud, attempted murder, and running a multi-state con operation. Madison sat in the defendant's chair next to him, tearfully accepting her own 3-year sentence for conspiracy and attempted murder. The transformation in both of them was remarkable. Tyler, once so charming and confident, looked broken and defeated. Madison had aged years in 6 months, her youthful face hollow with the weight of what she'd done. When the judge asked if they had anything to say before accepting their plea deals, Tyler stood up. "Your Honor, I want to apologize to Mrs. Walsh and to all the women I've hurt over the years. I know there's nothing I can say to make up for what I did, but I want her to know that I'm sorry." The judge turned to me. "Mrs. Walsh, would you like to make a statement?" I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of everyone's attention. For a moment, I looked at Madison and Tyler, these two people who tried to murder me for money and ended up destroying their own lives instead. "Your Honor, 6 months ago, these two people left me to die in the desert because they wanted my husband's money. They thought they were dealing with a helpless old widow who would be easy to eliminate." I paused, letting that sink in. They were wrong on every count. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't easy to eliminate. And most importantly, the money they were so desperate to steal was never going to be theirs in the first place. I pulled out a document and handed it to the court clerk. "This is my husband's original will written 5 years ago. In it, he specifically disinherits Madison if she ever attempts to harm me or steal from our estate. Robert was a brilliant man who understood exactly what kind of person our daughter might become." Madison's face went white. "That's impossible." "I never saw any because we never told you about it," I said calmly. "Robert hoped he'd never have to use that provision. But apparently he understood human nature better than I did." The judge reviewed the document. "Mrs. Walsh, this appears to be a valid legal provision. It is, which means that even if their plan had succeeded, even if they'd managed to kill me, Madison would have inherited nothing. The entire estate was designed to go to charity if anything suspicious happened to me." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. So, you see, Your Honor, they didn't just try to commit murder. They tried to commit a completely pointless murder. They were willing to kill me for money they were never going to get. I turned to face Madison directly. "You traded your mother's life for an inheritance that never existed. You chose a criminal over your own family. And now you'll spend the next 3 years in prison thinking about that choice." Madison was sobbing, but I felt nothing. The woman who'd raised her, who'd loved her unconditionally for 22 years, was gone. She died in that desert along with any maternal feelings I'd had left. Tyler, meanwhile, was staring at me with something that looked like respect. "You planned all of this," he said. "From the moment we left you in the desert, you knew exactly what you were going to do to us." "I told you that first night in Cairo that you'd awaken something dangerous," I replied. "I told you that you'd made the biggest mistake of your lives. You chose not to listen." The judge brought down his gavel and it was over. Tyler would spend the next 8 years in federal prison. Madison would spend 3 years thinking about what she'd done. And I would spend the rest of my life living exactly as I pleased, accountable to no one and threatened by no one. As they led Tyler and Madison away in handcuffs, I felt a tap on my shoulder. Harrison, my private investigator, was standing behind me with a satisfied smile. "How does it feel, Mrs. Walsh?" "Exactly like I thought it would," I replied. "Like justice." That evening, I treated myself to dinner at the best restaurant in Minneapolis. I ordered champagne and the most expensive item on the menu. And I sat by the window watching the city lights twinkle below. Tomorrow I would start the next chapter of my life. I was thinking about travel. Maybe a proper trip to Egypt, one where nobody tried to murder me. Maybe a Mediterranean cruise. Maybe I'd buy a house in Italy or France, somewhere warm where I could spend my golden years in peace. The money that Tyler and Madison had killed for was still mine, all $330 million of it. But more importantly, I'd learned something valuable about myself in that desert. I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, smarter than anyone had given me credit for, and absolutely ruthless. When someone threatened what was mine, Robert would have been proud. As I raised my glass in a silent toast to my late husband, I thought about the message I'd written on that wall in the abandoned Bedouin village. If you find this and I don't survive, they murdered me for my inheritance, but I had survived, and I'd done more than just survive. I'd triumphed completely. The desert had tried to kill me. My own family had betrayed me, and I'd emerged stronger than ever. At 67 years old, I'd learned that it's never too late to discover what you're really capable of. And what I was capable of, apparently, was magnificent revenge. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.